Okay, hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Stories from the Archives, Family Registers. I'm Courtney Reardon, Events Manager here at American Ancestors/NEHGS. I will be your moderator for today's program. This webinar is brought to you by the Brew Family Learning Center. American Ancestors and NEHGS is a nonprofit organization supported by our members and donors. We provide resources and expertise in nearly all aspects of family history research, and we are pleased to offer such programming for our members and friends around the world. Our presenters today are Judy Lucey and Todd Pattison. Judy Lucey oversees the management and preservation of the NEHGS Special Collections. She received a Bachelor of Science in Education from Northeastern University and a Master's in Library Science from Simmons College. She is co-author of the Genealogist Handbook for Irish Research and frequently contributes to American Ancestors magazine. Conservator Todd Pattison, I know I'm pronouncing Todd's last name probably wrong here, works to preserve and care for collections of books, manuscripts, and fine art. Todd comes to American Ancestors/NEHGS with more than 25 years of experience from the Northeast Document Conservation Center, and has also worked as a collections conservator at Harvard College Library. He has an undergraduate degree in art history from Nazareth College, an MLS from the University of Alabama, is a fellow in the American Institute for Conservation, and has taught the course American Publishers Bookbindings 1800 to 1900 for Rare Book School at the University of Virginia. Judy and Todd will walk us through family registers, how to access them, and tips on preserving items for your collection today. At any point during the presentation, feel free to type in your questions in the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen. We'll address as many as we can at the end of this presentation. There is live closed captioning available during this program. To turn those on, either click the closed captioning live transcript button or the 3-dot ellipses button in your Zoom controls. There is no handout for this lecture, but the session is being recorded and you will be able to watch the recording on our website or YouTube channel as many times as you want. Now, without further ado, I will pass things over to Judy. Judy, take it away.
Thank you, Courtney, and welcome again, everyone. I'm delighted to be with you today, and as we again share more stories from our archives, today I'm going to be showing you some of the family registers in our manuscript collection. Many of these are mostly from New England families, and also many of the examples I'll be showing are available online at our digital library and archives. So let's get started. Last year, about this time, Todd and I were talking about stories from our family Bible record collection. And the family Bible has long been that treasured family heirloom where family records are recorded and passed down through generations. By the mid-18th century, documenting family history begins to take on a more decorative arts sort of where people are decorating their family records using watercolor and ink, and also the use of embroidery, such as in samplers. Many professional colorists and engravers, such as Richard Brunton, Peter Maverick, Benjamin Blythe, all contributed early on in the final decades of the 18th century to creating these beautiful images. And many of the symbols that we commonly see that represent family unity, family relationships, documenting family life through, say, heart and tree emblems, using architectural motifs such as pillars and columns, and using chain designs. All of these are created in the family record. Here in New England, in the final decades of the 18th century, many individuals begin to produce beautiful family records. Many schools are producing them as part of their curriculum, and many individuals and households are also creating very beautiful family registers. And so in this next few examples, I just want to show you some examples of some hand-drawn and painted family registers from our collection. This lovely piece was donated to NEHGS in 1960 by a member who resided in Oregon. This hand-drawn and painted family register is for the Blake and Mary Clark Parker family of Southborough, Massachusetts. And as you can see, the names of the family members form a ring around the outside edge of the register, and with the color image of presumably their home, which is in the center of the piece. Now, this piece was created by their daughter Frances when she was about 14 years of age, and she signs and dates it in the lower right where the arrow is pointing. And she created it at the Medfield School, located in Medfield, Massachusetts, and it's dated March 15th, 1854. In 1809, 14-year-old Daniel Moody Lancaster of Newbury, Massachusetts, made and signed this watercolor register he called a genealogical family piece. And you'll notice a large encompassing heart, and that traces the two marriages of Daniel Dodge. First to his first wife was Martha Moody, and they had 5 children that are depicted here in this family register. And his second marriage to Mary Dudley Kimball in 1799, which did not produce any children. And you'll notice here the children's names are inscribed on these evenly half-spaced circles. It almost gives the effect of imitating a gravestone. And at the very bottom right, I've circled the school that he went to, which was the Newbury Street School. And Daniel also records his teacher's name, B.H. Cheever. But I want to just point out the use of the heart emblems in this example. You'll notice in addition to the all-encompassing heart, you have that heart that's just between Daniel and his 2 spouses. And the heart, along with the tree motif, are the 2 most popular elements that were used in 18th and 19th century New England, not only in family registers and family trees, but for example, even gravestone makers frequently used heart symbols in their carvings. Now, this piece is a part of a very large collection of family papers that was bequeathed to us along with the family home and its entire contents in the 1930s. This lovely hand-drawn and colored family register is for the William and Paulina Phelps Miller family. It lists the births and the birth dates of all of their 16 children, as well as a couple of marriage dates for William and Paulina and for their daughter Cynthia, and a few death dates. This was given to us in 1977 by the American Antiquarian Society, and it really has a lot of those interesting elements or symbols that were frequently used in the period. One of the most common is, of course, the use of the heart emblems. And in this piece, we see at the very top 2 touching hearts that represent 2 persons bonded in marriage. And it sort of represents that idea of love and marriage as well. In the upper left, where the father is standing, you'll notice that he has an anchor at his feet. And this is sort of stating, you know, here is this person that can be relied on for support and stability. You know, in other words, he is the mainstay of the family. And then, of course, you see the architectural motifs, the pillars, columns, and these were, again, frequently used items. And of course, it's sort of commemorating the family by means of just this upright standing structure. And of course, then the family names of the parents and the children are recorded around it. And lastly, my 2 favorite elements in this piece are I circled, and you'll see here on the left is a hand-drawn and painted cradle and the coffin on the right. The Bowen family tree came to us fairly recently in 2017. And as you can see, it's a hand-painted family register. And this is very different. It's illustrated with a window that frames a view of sailing ships and the harbor and the town of Marblehead. And this illustration As you can see from the arrow pointing to the top, it's written there, a present for Sarah Ashley Bowen from her father, Ashley Bowen of Marblehead. And you'll also notice on the left side where I have an arrow pointing, there's some handwritten text. That's family history, as well as below the illustration, there's additional family history recorded there. Now, Ashley was born in Marblehead in 1728, and he died there in 1813. And in his early life, from about 13 to 35, he was a sailor. But in his later life, he was known for his maritime sketches and is credited as the first American sailor to write an autobiography. Piece is a hand-drawn and again colored family register for the Nathaniel and Polly Curtis Lockwood family. On the back, they recorded additional family records, but I love, evidently a child came along and added some additional colors and drawings. You'll see the enjoined hearts. And I think it's just a lovely little piece of some, a family member creating this family record. By the 1830s, commercial print publishers begin to produce family registers in very large quantities. And let's talk a little bit about in this section some of the lithographs that we have. First, what is a lithograph? Well, it's taken from the Greek, meaning derived from two ancient Greek words, lithos, meaning stones, and graphein, meaning to write. And this is known as a planographic printing process where you're using a flat surface like flat stones or metal plates. Lithography really came into an existence in the 1820s. It grew in popularity in the 1830s and 40s, and publishers began to take advantage of this, particularly publishers from the New York and Hartford area. And many of these names you're probably familiar with, like Nathaniel Currier, and then later Currier and Ives, the Kellogg brothers, or Daniel Kellogg, and James Bailey. And James Bailey is the person who printed this register that you see here of the Elijah Flint family from Braintree, Vermont. So typically the family register was, when it was printed, had 4 columns where you could record the family name, birth, marriage, and death information. But I think one of the interesting features of a lithograph is that it not only records genealogical information, but it documents social history as well. So you have these images of family life and mourning customs. And I think the George Hall White register that you see here is a really good example of that. You have scenes of marriage, family life, and you have an image of mourning with the woman kneeling with the typical symbols for mourning of the period, the urn and the weeping willow. And this lithograph was published by Kellogg Brothers. And George and Eliza Morgan White were from Elba, New York, and Chicopee, Massachusetts. And what's interesting here about the genealogical information, it not only includes the dates for birth, marriages, and deaths, but the place, as you can see by the enlarged image that I have here. And what we can see here is family migration patterns. Okay, the couple were married in Springfield, Massachusetts, and then they removed to Elba, New York, Genesee County, where they had their first 2 children. And then by the time they're having their 3rd and 4th child, they are back in Massachusetts living in Chicopee. Now, if you're beginning to think that all of our family registers represent families with deep roots in New England, well, the John McCabe register here will dispel that notion for you. John McCabe was born in Cape Breton Island, as was his wife, Margaret Daly. John and Margaret married in Bangor, Maine in 1873, where their first child, James Arthur, was born in 1875. Now, according to this family register, their subsequent children were born at S Bar, Sydney. Now, S Bar, Sydney represents South Bar, which is a community in Sydney, Nova Scotia. So we can see here that the family returned to Nova Scotia sometime between 1875 and 1877, when their second child was born. Now, I took the liberty of tracing this family forward for this webinar today, and they continued to reside in Nova Scotia well into the 19th and early 20th century. And this lithograph was published by Currier and Ives about 1852, and we actually purchased this in 1939. Now here's another immigrant family. This is Patrick and Sarah Kiernan. They are Irish immigrants. They do not indicate only Ireland as their place of birth. They do not provide their birth dates. But they married in Providence, Rhode Island in 1845, and their 4 sons were born there as well. And this was produced by the publisher Kellogg and Comstock. And as you can see, it's hand colored and then completed in manuscript. And again, this is something that we purchased, and we purchased this actually in 1934. But what I noticed about this when I was considering using it for today is that it has a name in the death column that does not appear anywhere else in the record, which is rather unusual for a family register. And it records the death of Mary Kernan, who dies in 1850. But we really don't know who is Mary. So it sort of presents a little genealogical mystery for us. I tried to research just a little bit, but there's about a half a dozen Patrick Kernans residing in Providence at the same time. And several of them had various children of the same name. So I never solved the mystery, but maybe one day someone will come along and do so. So while many of our family registers are donated or purchased as a single item, some do come to us like the Tinkham family register with other records, family documents, and photographs. Now, this was donated to us in 2009, and it's a small collection. And it's described in our catalog as the records and photographs for the Gibson, Jackson, Nickerson, and Tinkham families from 1762 to about 1950. Now, the Tinkham Family Register is online in our digital library and archive, and we've also digitized and put online the photos and other materials that accompany the register. So you can see here, there is an obituary for Walter Irving Tinkham, and we learn that he was a lifelong resident of Taunton, Massachusetts. We also have a marriage announcement of Wallace Gibson, and it tells us where he was formerly employed and that he marries Alice Tinkham. We have photos of Mr. and Mrs. Tinkham here, and then also another set of family records that came with the collection. And the family records are for Elisha Nickerson and his wife, Rebecca Robinson. And we continue to collect family registers. And I wanted just to highlight these two because they came last year during the pandemic when our library was closed. I was contacted by a collector of family registers. He collected only New England family registers. And so through his generous donation, we have received over 24 new family registers that we're adding to the collection. So before I turn it over to Todd, I just want to mention very briefly how you can access family registers here at NAHGS. So the key to discovering what we have in our collections is to begin your search using our library catalog. Whenever a digitized version of a book or a manuscript is available in the digital library and archive, there's always a link to it in the library catalog record. And as you can see here, it appears just above the call number, and it will take you directly to the digitized version of the material. But I just want to point out that some of our materials in our digital library and archive are gated. Many items are free. You don't have to be a member to view them, but our genealogical materials are. Next, another way to access the collections is by using the URL digital.americanancestors.org. So here is the landing page for the collection. Now, these materials are browsable and some have searchable transcriptions, but this is not indexed like a genealogical database. So it only contains material from American ancestors and NAHGS, unlike our searchable database. You'll also note here that we separate out, or we divide the materials among the 3 repositories here at NAHGS. So for example, the Weiner Family Jewish Heritage Center has manuscripts and other items online. The Stanton Avery Special Collections, where I live, you can browse by just clicking on the panel here. And then we also have the 3rd repository is our research library, where you can access family history books and rare city directories and local histories. If you scroll down further on the page, there are other browse options that you have here, but we also highlight featured collections. And as you can see here, here is our family registers and Bible records. So without further ado, I'm going to turn you over to Todd Pattison, who will talk about conservation.
Thank you, Judy. And I would like to thank everyone for viewing today's webinar. Next slide. I'm going to talk today about the preservation of family registers. Most registers are paper-based, so one of the things that we need to understand is how best to prevent paper deterioration. Paper deteriorates over time. While we can slow this deterioration, how the paper was originally made can affect its longevity. Many family registers were produced between 1850 and 1950, a time period associated with poor quality paper. Wood pulp was often used, resulting in shorter paper fibers and increased acidity, which breaks down those fibers over time. Heat and humidity can speed up the chemical reactions that are causing this deterioration, while lower temperatures can slow them down. This makes the conditions in which you store your family registers extremely important. Ideally, you would like to have stable temperatures of not more than 70 degrees Fahrenheit with humidity in the range of 30 to 50%. Large swings in either temperature or humidity can cause damage on a small scale as the objects expand and contract, which can typically happen as we see seasonal changes from a colder, drier environment in winter to a hotter, more humid one in summer. Light can also act as a catalyst to the chemical reactions that harm your collections, so it is best to store materials in the dark whenever possible. Since the environment these objects are stored in is so important, they should not be placed in attics, basements, or garages. If they are stored in your living areas, you are more likely to notice if there are changes in the environment. We think of paper being acidic, but other materials can be as well, especially manuscript inks used to record vital records. The McIlwain register was printed using lithography, and the printing inks are stable, but some of the manuscript inks are iron gall based and show signs of deterioration. The deteriorating iron gall inks have bled through the paper and are now visible on the verso. The acidity in the inks is basically burning the paper in those areas and will eventually cause loss to the paper. Proper storage conditions will slow this deterioration, while higher temperatures or humidities will make the register deteriorate more quickly. Family registers in private hands are often framed for display. Frames can protect an object, but they can also cause damage if the materials used are poor quality or the framing was not done properly. The two largest areas of concern in a frame are the glazing on the front, typically glass, and any backings that are used behind the register. In both cases, these are areas where the materials can come into direct contact with the object. As framed objects are meant to be displayed, they are particularly susceptible to light damage. To better protect registers, the glazing should include ultraviolet protection, as this is the most harmful range of the light spectrum. Both glass and plexiglass can include UV coatings to limit the damage that light can cause. The glazing should also not touch the object, as that can lead to other problems. So the framing package should either include a mat or spacers to separate the glazing from the surface of the register. Filtering for UV light will also reduce the chances of fading any colors that may be part of the register, either printed colors or hand coloring. The Cummings register shown here shows the typical damage that results from exposure to light. The paper has discolored except for a small area at the very edges of the register that were hidden behind the inner edge of the frame. Along the left-hand side of the register, some water damage has washed away some of the byproducts from paper deterioration, resulting in a slightly lighter tone of the paper. This same register shows damage from an acidic backing behind the object in the frame. There are slightly darker vertical lines from a wood backing and a darker vertical line on the right-hand side where there was a gap between the two pieces of wood used for the backing. This gap allowed dust and environmental pollution to get at the paper in this area, resulting in increased deterioration. The Hersey register was originally framed with a wood back, half of which you can see in this image on the right. Acidic backings should be removed and replaced with an archival, acid-free backing as seen on the left. This high-quality backing can also act as a buffer or barrier between the object and the previous backing if there's information on the previous backing that you would like to keep. This can be put back on over the added barrier layer and retained with the frame. At NEHGS, we store many of our registers in protective enclosures instead of frames because of space concerns. Boxes can be an excellent choice for storing registers because they do a better job of protecting from light, dust, and rapid changes in temperature and relative humidity. There are high quality, commercially available enclosures for the storage of flat paper, such as registers, that come in a variety of sizes. The registers should first be placed in acid-free archival folders to separate them from other objects. And this can also help you organize your family records, as the registers can be placed in enclosures with other related family papers. Making multiple copies and distributing them widely is the best way to make sure information is not lost. New technologies make reformatting easier than ever, as even most modern smartphones have high-quality cameras. It can often be difficult to get a high-quality digital image of a framed family register, so you may need to unframe them before reformatting. In some cases, this will mean working with an outside vendor because of the difficulty of removing the object from the frame or the condition of the register itself. An important thing to keep in mind when getting digital images of your register is the verso of the object. There may be additional information on the back along with that on the front, as is the case with the Yoast register and the additional vital records recorded here. I'd like to now talk briefly about conservation of registers using the two recent acquisitions that Judy showed earlier. Quite often we look at a damaged object and assume because of that damage that it needs conservation treatment. However, a much better question to ask is, why do we want to do treatment on that object? What is the goal of conservation work, and will treatment achieve the desired outcome? At NEHGS, many of the registers in our collections are used for research purposes rather than for exhibit. So many of the treatments that we employed are designed to stabilize the object. If we're going to include a register in an exhibition or place it on display in our building, we can do aesthetic treatment, but this often takes more time and is not warranted by current use. The Hill register had surface dirt and tears and losses at the edges, as seen in the image on the left before treatment. The right shows the results of conservation. The paper was gently dry cleaned with a soft eraser and brush, and tears were mended with Japanese paper and starch paste, making it less likely to be damaged at the edges during handling. The Yost register also had surface dirt, but it had previous repairs using pressure-sensitive tape. As the adhesive of the tape ages, it first becomes yellow and then turns brown, staining the paper underneath. In the detail on the right, you can see this, in this case, that the tape is already starting to discolor. While the front of the register had a couple of pieces of tape, the back had much more. As the tape ages, it will discolor the paper to the point that it becomes visible on the front of the object, even though it was placed on the back. On the left, we see the register after treatment. The surface of the paper was cleaned with an eraser and brush, and then the tape was removed using heat and mechanical separation. Then the tears were mended with Japanese paper and starch paste. In the image of the front of the register after treatment, you can still see some of the staining caused by the tape in the lower left-hand corner. Removing the tape now is important because the staining will have only gotten much worse in the future. I wanted to leave you with some actionable steps if you have a family register in your own collections. First, make sure that you know where any registers or other important family papers are kept. This will help you determine if they are stored in an appropriate place. If you do have family registers, I would encourage you to copy that information and share it with others. This can be done with pictures using a smartphone or a digital camera. They could be scanned on a flatbed scanner, or they could be professionally done by an outside vendor. If you have framed registers, you should try to determine if the glazing and backing are potentially problematic. Now, remember, most registers are fairly durable, so don't panic and think that you need to do something right away. You have time to plan. Most of the registers we looked at today are at least 150 years old, and they likely did not have the best storage conditions for the majority of their existence. You should also be careful to monitor your storage environment to determine if you are having seasonal swings in temperature and humidity. The more you can lessen these swings, the better off your objects will be. And the last thing that I'd like to mention is that there are professionals to help if you have questions about the preservation or conservation of items in your collection. Don't be afraid to reach out and consult somebody. The professional organization in America for conservators is the American Institute for Conservation, also known as AIC. If you do seek out conservation treatment, you might want to make sure that the person performing the treatment is a member of this national professional organization. AIC's guidelines for finding a conservator can help you find someone not only in your geographic area, but also someone who specializes in paper-based items like family registers. I want to thank you, and I think we have plenty of time to answer some questions.
Thank you, Todd, and thank you, Judy. Now we have plenty of time to answer your questions. Some people have submitted them before, and we're getting lots in the Q&A button. Please, if you have a question for either Judy or Todd, please enter those into the Q&A panel on the bottom of your screen. So let's start off. Let's see. Lots of good questions. This first question is for Judy. Judy, what are some external sources for finding family registers other than our own archives at NEHGS?
There are several. There's really no one way to find primary source records, family registers or other primary source documents, including digitized primary sources on the internet, but there are a couple of free databases which may offer you more of a focused search than just using a simple Google search. And the first is, I frequently refer people to, is worldcat.org, which is a very large catalog database worldwide that represents about 10,000 libraries and archives. And you can look for archival material here as well as books. But there's also a free database called Archive Grid that contains all the archival and manuscript records in WorldCat. You can link to thousands of catalog records, finding aids, and also digital holdings for many libraries, archives, and particularly for museums and historical societies there. And lastly, I think the other source, maybe the Digital Public Library of America. This is a project developed by Harvard, and it provides public access to digital holdings here for libraries, archives, and museums here in the United States. And there's also a dedicated section for genealogical researchers. I think, though, when you begin to search just a little bit, start locally. Take a look. If your family, for example, was in Vermont for multiple generations, take a look at the local historical associations and the local historical societies, because they tend to only collect materials related to local families. So if you think, well, maybe I might find a family register, my family lived in this particular area for a number of years, then begin maybe your search local and then broaden it by maybe using one of these databases that I suggested.
Thank you, Judy. And I've also added those links that you just spoke about in the chat, and everyone should be able to see that. And along with that, someone has asked to please let us know the URL again for searching in our collections for the register. And Judy, if you could repeat that, and I will add that to the chat as you repeat that.
Yes, it's digital.americanancestors.org. And the other option to find our digital library archive, because that'll take you directly to the landing page, but you can also do it from the home page under search. There's a link there, so you can do that as well. So there's a few options: the library catalog, the exact URL, and also from the home page.
Great, thank you. And we also are receiving a question. Where would you find family register? I assume that this is a correct answer that you just said. You would find the family registers and Bibles in NEHGS.
Yes, that's where you would find if they've been digitized. But I would, if you're looking to see if we have one that may represent your family, start with the library catalog, because not all of our materials are digitized. So you may want to start there, but yes, anything that is digitized will be there on the digital library and archive.
Thank you. And Todd, a couple questions for you. lots of questions about just general conservation. This one is particularly interesting. How can one safely unroll and store large family trees sketched on stiff, thick paper that have been kept rolled for decades?
What you would first want to do would be to humidify it to relax the paper as much as you possibly can, because the paper fibers now have a memory and they want to be in this rolled condition. And if you try to unroll it without humidifying it, then you can actually break some of those fibers and do damage to the document. So typically you would put it in a humidification chamber. And if you did a quick Google search on humidifying rolled photographs or rolled documents, because typically photographs, especially panoramic photographs, are rolled like that as well. They will give you some simple directions on how to make a humidification chamber. It usually consists of a water source in the bottom, a way to suspend the rolled documents above that, and then it's all sealed inside of a normally like a large Tupperware container, or a clean, brand new plastic garbage container that has a lid. And after the item sits in there for 24 hours, then it's usually very humid in there at that point. It's relaxed it, and you can begin to unroll it. And then you just want to wait out the edges as you unroll it, and let it sit in that position for several days so that it can come back to the equilibrium of the space, and hopefully it should be much flatter.
Thank you. And a question that's a little related. Is it true that archived paper materials shouldn't be stored in plastic sleeves, plastic or cellophane sleeves?
There are some plastics that are inert and they won't cause any harm, but there's also a lot of plastics that have internal plasticizers and other additives to them that will damage paper as they degrade. So in general, I would say don't use plastic if you don't know what the material is made of, but there are certainly some vendors where you can buy a Melanex or Mylar or other types of plastics that are inert and are safe for the storage of paper documents. Polyethylene it's a good choice. So you just know what your plastics are, and if you're unsure, I would probably replace those sleeves.
Great. And a few people in the chat, Todd, are asking if you have any suggestions about where to purchase archival framing, storing, and other materials for these processes.
So you're probably going to find archival framing and storing materials from different vendors. So, places like Gaylord can have some archival products for storing paper. You also have other vendors for that, specifically for storing materials. Framing, you're much more likely to find that at a frame store. And what you want to be aware of with frames, the frames themselves are probably going to be made out of wood or some other type of material that frames are typically made out of. It's the packaging around that. So you would want UV coated glass or plexiglass for the glazing. You would want to make sure that you had an acid-free mount, an acid-free mat. So make sure that all the components in the frame, meet archival standards.
And just for my own curiosity, Todd, if one were to bring these materials to a frame shop, most folks at frame shops are also experts and can help you guide you through this process as well. Is that correct?
I would say a really good frame shop could, but you also want to ask them questions too. So one of the things that you want to be careful of is that if you're having a family register framed or reframed because you've taken it out of the frame, is how are they going to attach the register to the backing board? They would typically want to attach it using Japanese paper hinges just at the very top, and then attach those hinges to the board so that if it ever had to be taken off again, those hinges could be easily cut. They could also be taken off of the family register fairly simply. Be very aware that you don't want someone to laminate or mount your family register to a board, because the lamination process or the mounting process is something that's going to be either irreversible or it's going to be very difficult to get off in the future. And it may be using adhesives or heat set tissue that is not compatible to long-term storage of the object.
Great, thank you. Lots of questions in here. Keep putting those into the Q&A, folks. Question for Judy. Russell says that asks, were some lithographs only black and white? Other lithographs were printed in color in the 19th century, weren't they?
Yes, they were. Some were printed in color. And then sometimes they were also, as we saw today, hand colored. But yes, some of them were printed in color. A lot of them were. But also in like a black ink as well. And, these were mass produced, and not just here in New England or in New York, but they were widely produced and shared throughout Ohio, the Midwest. And many commercial publishers in cities like Chicago and Cincinnati and other places were also mass producing large quantities of these family registers.
Thank you, Judy. Lots of questions in the chat about family Bibles and specifically conservation of family Bibles. Can either one of you speak to that, and if family Bibles need as much conservation as family registers, and if how they differ?
Well, I would say they differ because a family register is usually a two-dimensional object. So it's a flat sheet of paper, where a Bible is a three-dimensional mechanical object that's meant to move. So it has to be open to be used. It has a binding along with the papers. So there are different elements of that can break down. So the front board typically comes off because it's heavy and it gets opened a lot, and the materials age and they also deteriorate. So, boxing is a great strategy for family Bibles, just to protect them and make sure that everything's together. They can receive conservation treatment, although the conservation treatment to repair family Bible is usually much more extensive. I would say for reformatting purposes, you're probably not going to reformat the entire family Bible, just those pages that have the vital records on them. And those are often stored on just a few pages for that purpose that were put in the Bible between the Old and New Testament. Although sometimes people write in on the flyleaf or the paste downs or other places. So you'd need to look through the Bible carefully to make sure that you're capturing all of the manuscript material that might be in there.
Thank you, Todd. And Christine asks, if your family didn't have a formal register, such as you've shown us, were there alternatives besides Bibles?
Well, some people would record simply just family records on paper. Other in terms of decorative arts, some used samplers. But we also have a lot of family records that are just simply recorded on paper and people send them to us. They're not decorative, they're not, but it's all about conserving and the family history and documenting that. And, you know, perhaps donating it to a place like this where it can be used by others.
Thank you, Judy. Since you just mentioned donation, we are having a lot of questions in the Q&A about the best places to donate these materials, if NEHGS accepts donations, and if it's best to donate these materials or keep them in your own home, in your own archives.
Well, you know, a lot of these items, you know, they're family treasures, they're family heirlooms, and we want to hold on to them. We have great attachment to them. Sometimes you may come to that point in your life where you don't have anyone to pass it down to. But the family information should be preserved. It has high research value. And so thinking about where to donate is a good idea. There are thinking about where the family may have lived in terms of, you know, a geographic location. You can start there. But you also want to do your homework. You want to look at the potential repositories that are in the area, historical societies or the like, you know, look at who's staffing their archives. Do they have professionals? You know, for example, here we not only have professional archivists that are caring for materials, but Todd is across the hall from me. So I will go across the hall, you know, if I need something conserved. And he's done that for Bibles and also for family registers and lots of other material that we have here in our manuscript collection. But I always encourage potential donors to ask lots of questions and how things will be cared for, et cetera, et cetera. So don't just look for anybody to hopefully just say yes, but you also want to do your homework as well.
And a couple questions about, I guess, digitization and making copies for families or family members, or creating digital copies for family members that are far away. Can either of you speak to that a little bit and how that's done?
Well, I'll start and then I might turn it over to Todd for maybe further comment. I think it's always good when you have original items that you're preserving, you know, within your family treasures, to create a digital copy. It reduces the wear and tear on the item. You're not handling it as frequently. And also it gives you an opportunity, as you mentioned, Courtney, in the question, an opportunity to share. It depends on the type of equipment you may have at home. You know, for example, with Bibles, sometimes it's very hard to use something like a flatbed scanner. You don't want to harm the materials. But you can also, perhaps, if you don't feel comfortable scanning materials at home, take it to a professional vendor to have it done. But I sometimes will just get photographed family Bible pages. I just ask for certain formats, and people just will send us photographs as well. But I don't know if, Todd, you may have some more to add to that in terms of digitization.
Well, I do think, you know, once you've digitized it, the more places you can store that information, the better. So you can usually send it as a file to other, you know, family relatives or interested people, or sometimes even repositories, you know, like Judy was saying, that, you know, we will sometimes take copies of Bible records, because the more places it's held, especially of these one-of-a-kind records, these manuscript records, the better chance it has of surviving. You can also print out on a, you know, permanent durable paper. Permanent refers to the chemical stability of the object over time. Durable refers to how strong that paper is when it's first manufactured. So that's going to be a very high archival quality paper. Print that out as well and have a hard copy that you can put someplace, because technology is not foolproof, and digital files can be lost. Computers can, both hardware and software can be a problem. So the more places you store something, the more ways you store it, the more likely that information is going to get lost.
Great, thank you both. That's great information. We have time for just a couple more questions. Let's see. This one is for you, Todd. I have an original pardon paper from the Civil War that is very faded and very yellow. Is it possible to have this document, quote, cleaned, making the ink more visible?
Well, unless it's very dirty, cleaning isn't going to probably make it any more legible if it's faded. Typically, the one thing that you can do for faded inks or graphite pencil notations is to either photograph them under UV light. So it's kind of like a black light, if you've heard that term before. It will make the ink or the graphite pencil fluoresce and show up much better. And if you don't have that, a black light or UV light, you could look for an outside vendor to do that. The other thing that you can do is you can take a digital image of it, and you can manipulate that digital image in some type of a photo manipulation program that will allow you to play with the contrast and different things like that to try to make it more legible. It's not really possible to make the inks themselves in a document that have faded more legible. And I noticed a couple of other questions that I'd like to just answer really quick. Someone asked about
Absolutely.
Filmoplast, which is used to repair paper. Filmoplast is basically a pressure sensitive tape. It has a carrier. It has an adhesive that stays sticky over time. So I would tend to stay away from Filmoplast. It's a better quality pressure sensitive tape than Scotch tape is, for instance, but it's going to have some of those same problems eventually that you would have with other pressure sensitive tapes. And someone asked about a spray product that they have seen at Michael's for reducing or eliminating acid in paper. And what a product like that basically is doing is putting a very high buffered substance into the paper, which is designed to kind of counteract the acid that's in there. And so the buffer and the acid coming together would approach more neutrality. The problem with that is you don't know how much of the buffering material you're putting in that. You don't exactly know what's in the solution besides that. And introducing a high alkaline substance can also do damage to the paper, because anything that's high alkaline, like lye, can, as it approaches more alkalinity, it can, do the same thing that acidity does to paper, and it can shift colors, change colors, and do things like that. So I'd be very wary of spraying anything onto a paper object, because you can't get it out once you've sprayed it in. So you want to be very careful. And if you have other paper documents, they have the same kind of issues that registers have. So if you had a marriage certificate from the 19th century, it's basically the same type of paper, has the same preservation and conservation concerns as a family register would have.
Great. Thank you, Todd. And thank you, Judy. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for this afternoon. This event was recorded, is being recorded, so you will all receive a recording of the event later this evening. And I thank you again for your thoughtful questions, and Todd and Judy, your thoughtful answers. If you have more specific questions about your family history research, you may consider working with our research service team who conducts research for hire. You can learn more by contacting research@nehgs.org, or you can go to americanancestors.org/chat to take advantage of our chat with a genealogist service. This is a great service that's free and open to the public through Tuesday through Saturday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern Time, with extended hours 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. on Wednesday. Thank you again for joining us today. As you leave the event, you will have the opportunity to fill out a survey and give us your feedback. As we continue to expand our webinars and online offerings, any feedback is extremely helpful and appreciated. This free webinar was made possible by the generous support of members and friends around the world. Please consider making a gift to American Ancestors to keep these programs free. I hope to see you at our online programs in the future. Goodbye for now.